Well, I've been asked to make this cosplay in comments for several times already, so, apologizing for such a long delay, I'm finally doing it. However, truth to speak, this cosplay might be considered a rather straightforward one, so I'd like to start this video not with the sliders, as I do in most of the Berserk cosplay videos, but by saying a few words about the character, before we actually get to the sliders. So, Irvine is an apostle and the captain of new band of the Falcon's Archers, aside of being hunter, and I'd add he's one of the most unusual apostles, being extremely humane for an apostle actually. He seems to have a rather quiet personality and seems to prefer to keep the distance from other apostles with their bestial habits. And he even cares about others, like shown in episode when he gives his coat to Sonya when she falls asleep in the forest, to protect her from cold. However, he's still definitely a beast, as he states it himself, when telling his story of hunting alone for days and eventually becoming a beast. As for the name Irvine, it could be derived from a composition of Celtic words ear, green, fresh and often, water. So his name might actually mean green water, fresh water, and the name Irvine is actually used in real life as a name of river in Scotland. So this meaning would kind of fit the forest hunter Mirror's Iron Viz, and he's even shown to sit beside some creek in one of the scenes. However, in Irvine we can also see element vine or wine, already familiar to us from my previous etymology videos, and namely, from the name Malvina or Eorl wine. So, it is possible that vine part of name Irvine could actually be derived from root wine meaning friend, while the whole name Irvine could also be a form of name of for wine, composed from ofer, for, and wine, friend. Also know that bad name for a forest hunter who turned into a beast himself. However, Irvine's apostle form looks more like a deer, if anything, not a boar really. Though I guess in nature wild boars sometimes hunt baby deer forms, maybe there's something about it, or maybe not. However, we can also recall the etymology of word deer and its root or the or. And, though it's a speculation, maybe Kentra used name Irvine as derived from Deorvine, dear friend, which would both fit Irvine's appearance in apostle form and personality. Of one, whose friends are wild deer, not humans or apostles, or something along those lines, or maybe of someone who is friend to Sonya. Plus dear friend in English sounds like a wordplay on dear friend, and I guess such wordplays are relatively common in names of Japanese manga, anime, other media, characters. Truth to speak, when I first thought of this, I simply came up with the name Dior wine, formed it from elements Dior and wine to fit Irvine of Berserk, but then I found that Dior wine is actually an existing real-life name of the same meaning. So I guess it's the real meaning of Mirror's Irvine's name, or, at least, the most fitting, and I doubt that it's a mere coincidence. Well, I hope that it was as interesting for you, as it was for me, because I love meaningful character names and researching their etymology, but since it's a cosplay video, I guess I should stop at that and finally get to the sliders and other cosplay elements. As for the face, it was quite a challenge really, as Irvine's depicted a little bit differently in different parts of manga, but I hope in the end the face I made is close enough. So, here go the sliders. As for the haircut choice, the problem is that Irvine isn't really shown without his hat while in human form often, actually almost never. However, there is this moment at the beginning of transformation when he throws his hat off and we see his hair. And from what we can assume from that moment, as well as Irvine's haircut in apostle form, the closest choice to him we have in Dark Souls is this haircut option. I guess it's quite close actually, only somewhat shorter, though who knows, maybe this is even a correct length and hair in that moment are longer because the transformation has already started. However, since the hair depicted there is longer really, I guess we could also try this haircut, though it would be a rather unorthodox approach. The point here is not only the longer hair, but also the fact that Irvine's hat in manga actually covers his ears, unlike for his hat of Dark Souls, but we'll discuss it later in more detail. And on longer distances, such haircut gives a somewhat closer image to what we see in manga. His ears and back of the head appear covered as if by the hat, but only when looked at from afar. So, I guess that could be an option too. However, hair depicted in that moment in manga is also quite similar to this. But let's return to other sliders. And now, let us discuss the armor and weapon options. Let's start with armor. As for the headpiece, the choice is fairly simple and straightforward here, for his hat. Although, it's not really too similar to Irvine's hat in details, it's really the closest thing and is still very reminiscent of it. And in Berserk references and inspirations video, we even listed it as a reference to Irvine. However, of course, it can be justly argued that both Furi's and Irvine's hats might be inspired by a certain popular folklore character often depicted in such hat. A little bit later, when we'll be discussing Furi's bow, we'll see that Furi's gear seems to be actually inspired by Irvine. So Furi's hat is actually the best choice. As for chest piece, it's a little more difficult. The thing is that Irvine's attire in manga actually looks super cool. Mr. Mira did a great job designing him, it really looks so right and simply cool. And, unfortunately, for now, there isn't anything that, in details, would look close to it in Dark Souls 3. However, there are some options that give more or less similar impression plus some other options that might be a little reminiscent of it in some details, though not very fitting in overall. So, the first option, a rather obvious one, which is generally quite similar to Irvine's attire and also fitting the hunter character, leather armor chest piece. Well, I guess it's needless to say much about it. It certainly gives the right impression and doesn't look terribly off, even though if we look in details, it's not that similar. Doesn't have a cape, for example. But still it's a rather good option, one of the best really. Alternatively, we can use another armor that also more or less gives the necessary impression and has a small cape, old sorcerer's coat. Though it's associated with sorcerers, it also doesn't look terribly off for Irvine and also is somewhat similar to his attire in manga. Also a really nice option, actually. I personally use this one, though I filmed most of the footage for this video in basic leather armor. As for other options, I guess Leonhard's garb might be an option, as it is a cape and sleeves might have a somewhat similar silhouette, but at the same time its aristocrat design with all those decorations really doesn't fit Irvine. Another weird option is Cornix's garb because of the feathers on its shoulders, which might actually look a little similar to those things Irvine has on his shoulders, upper sleeves in some scenes. But since it's basically feathers, Cornix's garb doesn't really make it for Irvine's cosplay. But, maybe it could be an alternative look on Irvine, like what if he was a little more I'm evil hunter. And now, let's proceed to the glove options. It was a little surprising to me, but when looking for proper gloves for this cosplay, I found that the most fitting option is Firekeeper gloves. They actually look quite well, as in manga, Irvine wore gloves that left his fingers uncovered, as he needed them that way for shooting arrows, I guess. Also, Firekeeper gloves material looks quite fitting, so I guess it's a really good option. As for other fingerless options, the brigand gloves could look rather well. Their shape of a hard manchette is rather similar to Irvine's manchettes he wears with gloves, but, unfortunately, the metal parts don't fit Irvine at all, as he's a hunter, archer, not a melee warrior, so he doesn't really need armor, as he usually deals with his enemies way before they're able to reach him. Other options might be different manchettes, like Pyromancer wrap or Conjurator manchettes, but they're also less fitting because of the material used. And of course you can also use leather gloves because of the hunter look, but that wouldn't be too close to manga. And now, let's finally discuss the trousers options. It's simpler here, as in manga Irvine wears the knee-high boots. And in Dark Souls 3 there are Leonhard's trousers with high boots that are actually close enough to Irvine's and fit his cosplay rather well. Also, they look good for walking through deep swamps. But if you don't like killing Leonhard or don't have his trousers for any other reason, I guess the leather boots might be an option too, though that wouldn't be really close to manga, but at least it would fit a hunter attire. Or, the black leather boots might be an option too, though not as fitting as Leonhard's trousers. Well, I guess it pretty much sums it up regarding the armor options, so let's now discuss the weapons. The primary weapon choice is quite trivial here, it's Frieze Bow, which is pretty much inspired by Irvine of Berserk manga, as we can see by the stance character takes when using its weapon skill. This stance is obviously similar to the stance Irvine takes in his apostle form to shoot the arrow. Also, the way Frieze Bow shoots 3 arrows at once when using the weapon skill is also pretty much a reference to how Irvine fires several arrows at once. And basically it's exactly the Frieze Bow and Frieze Hat that allow us to make this cosplay in the first place. As for the ammunition, I'd suggest using the feather arrows, as they're associated with hunters and fit the cosplay really well. So it's all pretty much good with the primary weapon. But since you might also like to use the cosplay for PvP, and it's basically Dark Souls, where it's rather difficult to get anywhere far without melee weapons, I'd also like to suggest some secondary, melee weapons, though in manga Irvine doesn't really use anything aside of his bow much, that would fit the cosplay well nonetheless. And since Irvine is a hunter, I guess we may use some tools that would be natural for a hunter, like daggers, that could as well be used by hunters to skin their prey and things like that. So I'd suggest using Bandit's knife as a left-hand weapon along with the black bow of Frieze, as this knife has a necessary appearance and looks rather well and natural along with other elements of the cosplay. Alternatively, the Brigand's twin daggers also give the necessary impression. And if we recall that Irvine is also the archer's captain, we can also use another melee weapon, historically used by the English longbowmen as their secondary weapon, falchion. But, I'd also say that it's less fitting for Irvine, since it's more like historical 13th century English bowman cosplay thing, by the by, if you like. Later I can make the separate video about this historical cosplay, though comparing to Dark Souls 2, where there really were way better options for such cosplay, in Dark Souls 3 there's kinda less of fitting gear. And I guess now, with additional melee weapons options, our Irvine's cosplay is pretty much complete. Well, we've discussed Irvine as a character, discussed a rather interesting meaning of his name, and have looked at some appearance sliders and gear, armor and weapon options for his cosplay, so I guess that's pretty much it for this video, basically. Again, I end up making video way longer than I hoped to. Thanks for watching, and check out other etymology, lore or cosplay videos on my channel if you like.